Oui, c'est bon. Il est là.
All right, he's with us. So we have already introduced you. We would request you to give us some opening comments, please. Here you are. So we welcome you. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to join you this morning. Sorry for being a little late. Just 2 or 4 remarks about Africa, French military, the EU, and NATO. First of all, I can't say, is it okay? I can say at any cost what could be a success for the French intervention and French military in the Sahel and in Western Africa. Maybe if there is something to say about that, when there is no possibility of success, there is no reason to fight. And for me, this is my first comment about the current situation. And we are at the end of the day, obviously, about that. Second, I would say 50 years ago, I'm quite sure French citizens and a lot of European citizens have a far better understanding of their African counterparts than they have for the moment. Some of them were very close with nature. Some of them have problems with water, with pests and insects, with natural resources, and so on and so on. And at the moment, they have nothing to say to their African counterparts because they live in a different world. Now, somebody who has Google on his vehicles just as anything by a satellite way is very, very far away from his African counterpart. And for me, this is my second point. We are in a deep misunderstanding because we are on a social constructive way where what counts is no more reality. What counts is human rights. What counts is what reality must be and not what it be. And for me, this is a very important point about all these misunderstanding with the Sahelian zone. I saw yesterday strong demonstration in Burkina Faso against the French intervention. We are just at the beginning of that. And these misunderstandings are at stake everywhere in Africa between European Union, between French people and their African counterparts. The last thing for these opening remarks, we were alone in Africa. Since the Berlin Treaty and since European countries, European nations, everyone has its share of this wonderful African cake, as King Leopold of Belgium said, especially about Congo, which was his private property. Since the Berlin Treaty, 1880, each European country was quite alone in Africa. For instance, French citizens and the French military were quite alone in Mali, in Central Africa, and so on and so on. It's no more the case. And what is a very important move quite recently, Turkey is over there, Israel is over there, of course the US are over there, of course Russians are over there, with a quite long footprint coming back to the 60s and the strong decolonization movement and the revolution operations. And of course, China, India, and some other newcomers are present in the zone. This is creating a totally new strategic situation because it's come to be impossible to prevent and to manage operations the way we did in the recent past. We are not alone. There is a competition for Africa. There is open ambitions from different countries for Africa, and this is creating a totally new strategic situation. Maybe NATO will come on this operation theater. Maybe a sovereign European army will come. I'm not so sure it will happen, but it's in Emmanuel Macron's spirit. Something totally new is creating the picture we are facing now in West Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Juvin. I would request Mr. Kortunov to give his comments or remarks on what you just said. Mr. Kortunov, please.
Thank you. Let me just limit myself to very brief observations about the problems that I think Europe confronts in dealing with the Russian engagement in Africa and the problems that Russia sees in trying to assess the European engagement in Africa. I think that the major problem that we face on the Russian side is that quite often in Moscow, they do not fully comprehend the sensitivity of African problems to our European partners. Russia itself is quite sensitive to what it understands as its privileged interests in the territory of the former Soviet Union. Russia sometimes is very nervous when it sees other countries getting involved in this part of the world. It believes that this involvement might be detrimental to Russia's interests and detrimental to regional stability. I think that the same approach should be applied by Moscow in responding to the European engagement in Africa. Africa is arguably as important for European nations as the post-Soviet space is important for Russia. And of course, there is a long historical track record of relations between major European nations on the one hand and their former colonies in the African continent on the other. There are cultural bonds, there are linguistic bonds which cannot and should not be ignored. And there are also large African diasporas in Europe. So not only it justifies a European engagement in Africa, but it makes Africa very special. I would call it a family affair for many major European nations, especially nations with a significant colonial past. So I think that in cases like Mali, for example, the Russian side should demonstrate more sensitivity to the priorities of France. Likewise, in case of Libya, it should definitely consider positions of France and Italy in a more systematic way. And I think that in the end of the day, that would help Russia to forge its own policy in the African continent in a more productive and a more constructive way than it is the case right now. On the other hand, I think if you look at the European dimension, my sense is that quite often many European nations look at the Russian engagement in Africa only as a challenge, only as a potential threat. Russia is perceived not as a part of the solution for African problems, but rather a part of problems themselves. And the natural inclination of some of our European partners would be to say that you don't belong here. You should deal with your parts of the world and leave Africa to Europe. I think that it is also not exactly the most productive way of approaching African problems and in assessing the Russian engagement in African problems. Russia can be a spoiler, and definitely if it is not a stakeholder in African problems, the temptation to become a spoiler might be even more significant. But we cannot argue that Russia has its own track record with African nations, that Russia cannot contribute to commons in Africa. And definitely Europe should take a more comprehensive approach, not only to challenges that the Russian engagement can present, but also to opportunities that can come together with the Russian engagement. Russia might be a significant security provider together with European nations, but it can also provide in such areas as public health, education, communication, energy development, and many others. There is no reason that would place Europe and Russia on the opposite sides in the engagement in Africa. There is no reason we cannot cooperate on certain issues in many African countries, and there is no reason to believe that competition between various places is always bad for the African continent, for nations in the region. So this relationship is very complex. I hope that we can consider it as a multidimensional relationship engaging many European nations and the Russian Federation, and including elements of competition, maybe even confrontation, but in many areas potential collaboration and even direct cooperation. Let me end with saying that since Russia is also a member of the United Nations Security Council, and France is a permanent member of the UN Security Council, we definitely need to work harder in reconciling positions in order to be capable of pursuing resolutions of UN Security Council. There are some good precedents in working jointly on a number of such resolutions, but there are also stories of failure when Moscow or Paris opted to block resolution drafts presented by other sides. I hope that we will be in a position to avoid such situations in future. And let me say that I feel that meetings like the one that we have today are important because they offer a second-track opportunity to explore specific issues that can later on become items on the agenda of bilateral or multilateral official negotiations on African issues. Finally, let me say that we have this meeting on the eve of the G20 summit in Italy. Africa will be high on the radar screen of this summit, and I do hope that this summit might open new ways for multilateral international cooperation on burning issues of African security and development. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kortunov. I would now like to request our first speaker, Dr. Daniel Dory, from the University of La Rochelle in France, to speak on terrorism in the Three Borders area, a very relevant issue to the overall theme that we are discussing today. He is a former Vice Minister of Territorial Planning in the Republic of Bolivia. So he brings an original background and perspective. Dr. Dory, the floor is yours. 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. The sound is functioning.
Sorry, your voice is muted. You need to unmute.
So now it works. Well, I will begin, but I'm not sure that that it works. So please inform me if it works. Well, I'm supposed to speak about terrorism, and that's normal because it's my specialty as scholar, not as practitioner, obviously. But maybe we can begin with a small consideration about crude geopolitics. The relation with Africa and Europe and Russia have three levels, I think, and we need to understand them together. First, there is a global level which concerns Islamism, and Europe and Russia are concerned by Islamism, which has a focus in Africa, and a bigger and bigger focus in Africa. I will develop that later. And the second aspect is the bilateral, let us say so, the bilateral relation between Russia in one side and Europe in the other, with Africa, but not in general with Africa, because there are no specific relations from continent or country to continent, but relations from each country to each other country, even if the European community let's try to let us believe that they have some influence in what's happening in the world. So what happened in the specific French intervention in Sahel, in Mali specifically, in 2013? We have an example of an intervention, a military intervention, which has not been politically prepared and that had no final goal. The only tactical goal was to stop the jihadi who are going to take Bamako at that moment. Once that finished, there was no other specific goal, and specifically there is no idea of what a victory could be. So to make a war without knowing what a victory can be is somewhat problematic. And now we are in this problem. The worst possible scenario that everybody considers in silence, but now we are between experts and we can say it, it's the worst scenario, and we are going to have it very soon, is that an African mob, some kind of anti-colonial manifestations like those in Burkina Faso, Ouagadougou last week, in Mali every week. The problem is that this kind of mobs converge to the place where the French troops are, and they surround them very aggressively, and the French have to shoot to get out of there. And that is obviously the worst scenario. What these interventions reached at now is the fact that there is a dispersion of the terrorist activity. But be very careful, and it's very important, those guys are not bad guys because they use terrorism. They are not our enemy because they use terrorism. They use terrorism because they are our enemies. And terrorism is a technique, and there are a lot of other techniques. And if we focus on terrorism, we are mistaken all the analysis. Terrorism is only a tactic, an asymmetric warfare tactic, which permits to have an impact when territorial control is not possible. But now territorial control is beginning to be implemented in many parts of West Africa. We mapped that in several articles we made with my colleague Herve, and we are able to understand that this jihadi wave is going to the Guinea Gulf, and that has obviously global geopolitical consequences. But I repeat, it's not because they are terrorists, it's because they have a project that affects the survival of Europe, including obviously Russia. But the worst enemies of the survival of the French people and the European peoples are, in my opinion, not in the Sahel in Mali, but they are in the government and in the European Commission. And obviously, in my opinion, people like Soros are most dangerous than Osama bin Laden, because they are in the political system. So we have to speak very clearly. What Russia can do in this case, I find always very funny when we speak about the stability of Africa. Because Africa is not stable, will not be stable, there will not be development, because the demographic increase is fatally bigger and much bigger than the economic development. So we have to deal with permanent instability, with youth migration, with youth violence. And that is the reality scenario. We obviously need to have kind words, speaking of love, peace, development, health, etc. And those nice words are useful. But we must also, at the same time we use these kinds of words, know that the problems are structural, and the solution at the moment is huge immigration. It's to say we transfer some problems of the third world to Europe, and we are third worldizing Europe, but it's not a solution for Africa, and a double no solution, because a lot of people who are coming to Europe, illegally mostly of them, are the most qualified, the young people who can fight for their countries and who are here in Europe, not fighting, obviously, or fighting the French police, but it's not what was intended initially. So the problem, as a very short introduction, because in 10 minutes it's not possible to go deep. We need more time and more seminaries like this one to develop. The problem is now, first, a contention. We have to deal not with optimistic conclusions, but we have to manage between bad solution, trying to avoid the worst. Secondly, we need dramatically, but that I insist very much, to understand the kind of conflict we are living in. The kind of conflict is not, again and again, I repeat that as long as I can do it, it's not to deal with terrorism. Terrorism is a symptom, but the problem is that we are in a kind of asymmetric total war in which the terrorism is a tool. And if we don't understand that, we cannot engage, for instance, military efforts with a chance of success, because there is no possible success in a fight between a regular army, 4,000 to 5,000 men, and a kind of octopus or medusa that is profoundly deep in the societies where we are intervening. So the French solution to put troops on the ground is probably unavoidable, but it's not the better. The best solution probably is to help, in the measure of the possibilities, to help the remaining states, which are now in very, very strong conflicts and surrounded by forces that are really trying to destroy them, to help those remaining states to remain and to control at least a reasonable part of their territory. That's the real option. I don't find at this moment, with the institutions we have in Europe, but Europe, the European Union, not Europe continent, but the European Union, I don't see another more optimistic solution. Obviously, at this hour of the morning, what I say is not very optimistic, but sometimes I think we have to begin our journey with some kind of realist considerations. Well, that would be, in short, what I want to bring to the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dory. We are told that Mrs. Piskonova would like to speak now because she will have to leave. I also understand Dr. Wolfgang Pusztai will not be free after 11 o'clock. So I would request Dr. Natalia Piskonova, Assistant Professor, Faculty of World Politics, Moscow State University, to speak for 10 minutes, and then we will immediately pass on the microphone to Dr. Pusztai, if that's all right with everyone. Dr. Piskonova, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Natalia Piskonova. I'm an associate professor in international relations and world politics at Moscow State University, Faculty of World Politics. I hold a PhD in political science. And today I would like to take 10 probably minutes of your time to talk about the current trends of conflicts that we do see today in Africa. I would like to start my slideshow right now. I hope you can see that. So please tell me if you have the picture of the slideshow on your screens. I hope you can see it. Good, that's very nice. And I would like to start by attracting your attention to this map. So if we look at this map, this is the map which is provided by the famous conflict barometer, very good database made annually by the Heidelberg University in Germany that provides statistical data and some analysis for the current conflicts in the world. So I would like to start by saying that usually when we talk about conflicts in Africa, conflicts in the world, I would say, we usually say that Africa is the top conflicts region. However, if we have a look at the map, we will see that not the whole continent of Africa is actually covered with those drastic bloody conflicts. We would see that we have way much more conflicts in Asia, especially in what we call the area of the Greater Middle East. However, if we look at the African map, we will see those black colored areas of Northeast Africa, Eastern Africa, certain parts of Western Africa, where we do see the most grave conflicts of humanity right now and today. So we shall speak about that a little bit more. I would like to draw attention to the information that was provided by the conflict barometer. So we'll try to measure the conflicts and African trends for the last 5 years. So when we focus on this 5-year period, this is what we see. Sub-Saharan Africa, I would just note that we do not include Maghreb area, the Northern Africa, into this category because it really mostly deals with the Middle Eastern and the problems and the Arab area problems as well. We'll see that Africa does not actually hold the first place in the most conflict-prone areas. The first place goes to Asia because of the Greater Middle East issues and other issues as well. So currently, Africa ranks only second in this global hierarchy of conflicts. However, we shall see a few more interesting things. Judging on the conflict issues and frequent of conflict intensities in all the conflicts of the world, we shall see that there is a clear-cut trend that the majority of conflicts today is actually domestic conflicts or intrastate conflicts. It's not international conflicts. It's not those classic interstate wars of 19th century and so on. It's not even the war for autonomy kind of a conflict or the sub-state conflict as well. So the trend number one would be that African conflicts are mostly domestic conflicts, and that actually corresponds to the global trends of conflict analysis. Next, we shall focus on the frequency of conflict items. So when we focus on the agenda of all the conflicts in the world, including African conflicts, we will see another stereotype actually fail. The stereotype is that usually when we talk about conflicts, we say that, okay, African conflicts and conflicts are mostly about territory, borders, and countries trying to have more territory or autonomy, for example, from another country and so on, so federalization conflicts and so on. However, this does prove to be not true when we talk about the global trends and conflicts for the last 5 years, according to the what the conflict barometer writes. The number one issue for the conflict agenda globally and in Africa as well would be system and ideology conflicts. And here we do include conflicts that deal with political parties, that deal with religion, all those religious issues and religious plus ethnic conflict issues do all manifest themselves right here. So we see that the second trend is that conflict items or conflict agendas in the world are actually topped and dominated by the systematic and ideological conflict. And this is quite paradoxical for the 21st century. However, this is what we have. The second place in conflict agenda is somehow shared by three items in a row. So that is the conflicts for resources, which is kind of sounds more classical to us, and that is a type of conflict for that deal with the national power struggle. That's what we saw in Guinea. That's what we see in Central African Republic and Chad and many other countries as well, in Nigeria definitely as well, and conflicts for subnational predominance. So that's also focus on political parties and political upheavals, ability to autonomize certain regions and so on. Next, if we have a look at the intensity and the level of violence that is actually exhibited by African conflicts in a region to region basis, we would see the very clear picture. So the gravest conflicts that are exhibited today in Africa, in Sub-Saharan Africa minus Maghreb, definitely would come from Central Africa. See here, you can see this darkest areas here. That's the Central African Republic. We also see Chad. So, you know, we don't, it doesn't come as a surprise, definitely. We see the area in Somalia. We see the areas in southern Somalia where the piracy has actually hit off again after years of being somehow limited by the EU NAV force, for example. However, we do see this new wave of piracy again spiraling, plus the issue between Somaliland and Puntland and the problem of de facto states and so on. And we definitely see the problem in Western Africa, especially areas that were dominated by Boko Haram, and of course some areas that exhibited problems in Nigeria and Mali as well. So this also does not come as a surprise here. We do see a very good trend here that we do not see violent conflicts in the majority of the southern part of the continent. If you focus on the map, you would see Angola, Botswana, Zambia, all those areas being quite stable and not progressing, fortunately, to the violent crisis as well. Next, if we have a look at how these conflicts try to change their dynamics with a period of time, and we focus on the sub-national conflicts only, we shall see that the situation is quite better. We shall see that violence here is exhibited mostly in Western Africa or central to Western Africa and certain parts of Somalia, definitely. So Jubaland and Mahirland, so these areas hit by piracy and the problem of the what we call the pirates port of Hargeisa and other areas are still present here. So we will see less violence at that level. And next, we shall focus on a few more issues, and then I will then probably round up. We will focus on these two graphs. With the first one shows us, skip that. The intensities of Sub-Saharan African conflicts, very, very recent times, so 2020 mostly, and some prospects for 2021 probably. So we see that there are not so many open wars, or as we say, full-scale wars in Africa. So there would be the lesser extent of conflicts here. But the number one type of conflicts that we see in Africa, and that is the next trend for conflicts, would be a violent crisis. So it is not already a dispute or a peaceful demonstration or a peaceful process that we could see without any kind of violence on either of the parties, but that's really a violent crisis with usually with a rather high level of violence, unfortunately. And then we will see that there is quite a lesser extent paid to what we call limited wars, transnational wars, or full-scale wars in Africa. So Africa does not go to war with Africa mostly. So it might be in a violent crisis, but it does not progress to any other level as well. And finally, I would like to draw attention to the very last graph, and then I will round up. If we focus on why does Africa go to war, or when it does, considering the conflict agenda, we shall see again that Africa today fights for national power. So this is a kind of a change back from 2017, 2018. So in the pandemic period, 2019, 2020, Africa has been fighting for national power. So political issues stepped into the political agenda here, and subnational predominance, which also deals with the peculiarities of the political processes in Africa. And then we see this change in agenda compared to 2018, 2017. System and ideology issues step into the second or third place only. And the battle for resources, including agreements with foreign companies for extraction of resources in Africa, actually shares only the third place in the conflict agenda, and that is the last trend I would like to talk about. I will stop at this point. Thank you so much, and I will be open for questions until I have to run for the lecture. Unfortunately, that's a regular online lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Piskonova. I will now request Dr. Pusztai from the senior advisor from the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy in Vienna to enlighten us. He's going to speak about Islamism and the Islamic State in the Sahelian region. Dr. Pusztai, please.
Good morning. At first, I have no PhD. I have 2 masters, but no PhD, so please no doctor. And the topic I've received from you was to discuss about the strategy on how to stabilize the African continent. Russia, Europe, and especially France have certainly some differences, some different strategic interests with regard to Africa. But as it was outlined before, there are also some common interests. And I would say the stabilization of the continent is certainly such a common interest in order to pursue the own economic interests, regardless if we are talking about Russia, France, or one of the other European countries, or someone else. And another one, as you just mentioned before, is containing radical Islam. But containing radical Islam is certainly also a common interest for Europe, for France, and for Russia. So what could be done about it? From my point of view, it is necessary to develop a comprehensive strategy to stabilize Africa. And such a comprehensive strategy needs to be three-layered. The first layer, I call it containing the multipliers of destabilization and improving good governance. The second one is achieving a broad impact. The third one is narrowing the gap to the developed world. A proper sequencing between these layers is necessary, because if the multipliers are not under control, you can forget about the rest. It is necessary to encourage non-European states, also the Arabs, the Chinese, the Americans, to contribute to this. And of course, I'm quite realistic. It is not possible to stabilize each and any African country in the near future. So it will be necessary to establish something like refugee safety zones in some crisis areas. Let me have a brief look on the first layer, containing the multipliers of destabilization and improving good governance. The objective is to limit population growth, to achieve progress on environmental protection, to minimize corruption and cultivate good governance. There is absolutely no way to stabilize Africa if the demographic developments materialize as currently expected. The provision of social security, establishing basic health standards to reduce infant mortality, and especially changing the role of women in society are paramount to limit the population growth. Environmental degradation needs to be reduced by improving waste management, wastewater treatment, facilitating public transportation, and other measures. A further decrease of agricultural cultivation areas in Africa must be avoided. You know that in several countries, about 2/3 of the population are working in the agricultural sector. Water security is of critical importance. Promoting ethics, facilitating good governance by reducing bureaucracy, raising efficiency and training on modern technology, as well as in particular fighting corruptions are the focus of training the administrations. I've discussed recently with someone from USAID about this, and he said, Wolfgang, the more money we are sending to country X, the more millionaires we are producing, but there is no impact on the ground. So this is the first layer, to work on the population growth, to contain the demographic developments, to work on environmental degradation and promote good governance and fighting corruption. The second layer is achieving a broad impact. This means to implement the most urgent measures for stabilization and to deal with the key problems in the social, economic, security, and human rights sector. The basic idea is to use the always limited resources for projects which aim to achieve a broad impact and a visible impact for the population. The social situation must be improved by the provision of basic supplies, by better general health standards and basic education. This does not mean high-end hospitals or universities, but healthcare facilities for about 80% of the kinds of diseases, and schools for compulsory education. Job creation needs to focus on the many people with relatively low qualifications, especially on the creation of infrastructure, as infrastructure is also one of the preconditions for further development, and also I'm advising some companies on this, for foreign investments. If there is no proper infrastructure, foreign enterprises will be quite hesitant to invest. It is necessary to achieve agricultural improvements, but not by industrialization of the agriculture. This is a job killer. By enlarging fertile land, better irrigation, and the creation of additional jobs. If they have not enough grain, if they have not enough food, there should be sufficient available in Russia, in Europe, and in Canada. So the objective is not to industrialize the African agriculture. The objective is to establish or to keep jobs for the many. Security forces must concentrate, security forces training must concentrate on officers training and non-commissioned officers training. And you, both countries, the French and the Russians, you have a vast experience in this. This needs also to include the communication of modern values and human rights. So this is about multipliers, train the trainers. As a matter, as it's for me now a little bit a matter of time, I can't go into the details. I just want to jump to the third layer. The third layer is narrowing the gap to the developed world. The objective is here to consolidate and achieve a significant improvement of the sectors mentioned above. So although a broad effect is most important for the success of the strategy, at the given time, and I'm talking into the, let's say, mid-future, it is essentially to shift the focus to peak performance, to bring these countries, or at least some of them, closer to the European world. Sequencing is key for this. Investments need to focus at first in the first layer, for an initial period until there is sufficient progress there. As I said, it's a waste of money to fight unemployment if it's not possible to contain demographic developments. So a progress on the first layer is a precondition for the second layer. And the progress on the second layer is a precondition for the third layer. So who shall coordinate this? No one, no one. It is necessary to shape the way of thinking. The way of thinking that all those who are working in Africa, who are working on development in Africa, countries, the international financial institutions, international entities, understand and work on these three layers in sequence. Funding, therefore, must not only come from the European Union, but also from Russia, from the Arabs and the Americans and the Chinese. Let me have at the very end a brief sentence on these refugee safety zones. And the French will remember Opération Turquoise in Rwanda. In some crisis areas, it will be necessary to establish UN-administrated refugee safety zones to allow the local population to stay within their own countries or right over the border. These zones should not be just another refugee camp. They must be constructed and organized like new, maybe temporary, but like new cities offering education and working opportunities. Furthermore, these refugee safety zones should offer organized proceedings for people seeking asylum in other countries, including European countries. So an organized migration procedure should also lower the probability of terrorism infiltration into our countries. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Pusztai. I suspect that before we proceed, we would like to give some space for questions and for a discussion about what has been said. I was particularly struck by your remark about the need to provide infrastructural development, but tie it with an educational and in a way a policy modification approach as far as the management of these societies. And as we all know, those who are now investing heavily in African infrastructure, in particular the Chinese, are not really trying to interfere with their form of government. They do not want to get into ideological issues as the West generally does. But this being said, I would be appreciative if anyone has any comments to make on the last talks. You may raise your hand.
I have a short comment, but I don't know if You hear me?
Hear you.
Okay, so I can go. No, very short comments about the maps that Natalia showed. We have to keep clear that they are obviously information about 3 or 4 years ago. Now the situation worsened considerably, and what is interesting in this kind of conflict is the dynamic trend and the territorial trend of the conflict. What we see is a broadening scope of conflicts with a directional content, north-south schematically, and that we have to take care about that. The second aspect is the contribution of Wolfgang. Obviously, we have to provide education, democracy, etc., etc. The problem is who provides it. As you know, the European countries are now in a nearly bankrupt economic situation. So do we expect that Europe, in special in the United States, also in bankrupt, will provide indefinitely all the public services that the states of Africa are unable to produce? Obviously, the problem is mainly demographic, and a small problem that, as nobody mentioned this aspect, is the ethnic and tribal conflicts. We cannot solve ethnic and tribal conflicts by democracy, because electoral democracy in Africa is ethnic counting. We know that the parties in Africa are ethnic parties. They have obviously beautiful names, but they are ethnic rooted. If you want a clear proof of that, look at the Nigerian example or the example in Burkina Faso that I know better. So we have to deal problems with an absolutely impossibility at short term, maybe in some centuries, but in some centuries we are not going to gather again to discuss the problem, at least us. We are dealing with the ethnical impossibility to avoid violence by the standard democratic means, because the ethnic small groups are always losing in a pacifical content. So it's normal that they try to survive by other ways. That, I think, it's an important point that in the case of Africa, we have to remember always. That's the short comment, not very optimistic, I admit, but it's a short comment that I think is relevant.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? If there are no immediate
May I add briefly?
questions, or I would then, on the list we have here, the next speaker is Dr. Denis Degterev from RUDN University. He's the chair of the Department of Theory and History of International Relations. And he will speak about the mosaic of the major actors in the Malian conflict. Rebels, Islamists, Tuareg, herders, and farmers. Dr. Degterev.
Dear colleagues, thank you very much for inviting me. I represent People's Friendship University of Russia, ex-Patrice Lumumba University. We have around 7,000 foreign students. Majority are from Global South countries and also from the region, right? From West Africa as well. I also had a practical experience. I worked for 3 years in West Africa. Of course, we specialize on Global South regions and West Africa in particular. At our department, we analyze different conflicts. Also, no, I have a lot of PhD students, for example, like in 1 month, we will defend theses on Sahel, on strategies of regional players, etc. But also we specialize on peacekeeping. So peacekeeping in Africa is also one of our focuses. We organized, we have a seminar, regular seminar on peacekeeping in Global South, right? And we already made it on West Africa. Among participants, there were, for example, ex-Prime Minister of Mali and and advisor of Guillaume Soro from Côte d'Ivoire, etc. Many scholars, etc. And I guess in some weeks we will organize a seminar on Central Africa, but my colleague Svetlana Bokeria will tell about it later on. Speaking about Mali, it's clear that little by little this territory, which was this conflict, which was not very familiar to majority of people, is now becoming one of the major problems in world politics. And together with my colleagues, we made the research, and is not the final. These are not final results. These are intermediary results we are going to present today. I would like to present my colleague who is working in Moscow, Anna Davichuk, right? Anna is here, right? And also the other colleague is Umar Sidibe, right? He is in Mali, right? So he is doing field research. So we would like to, our major goal was to understand, right? What are major actors in Mali crisis, right? Because like, we understand it's not an easy task, right? But is a good challenge for us as researchers. I would ask Anna to demonstrate, right, the mosaic, right, the overall scheme of the conflict, right, which we preliminary got, right. So we have different actors and relations between actors, which could be friendly, neutral, and unfriendly, different types of actors. I am a defender of empirical determinism, right? So we rely very much on applied analysis, right? And I would ask also Anna to demonstrate Excel table, right? To show that what we are doing is not just, you know, painting different colors, etc. For each of these, you know, relationship between actors, we had around 70 relationship between actors. Anna made sources, right? Anna, could you demonstrate at least some of them, like 1, 2, 3, yeah, and so on, yeah. Yeah, you see, so for each of these relationship, we have proofs, right? We have kind of fact checking 5, 6 major news, right? From local newspapers, from news agencies, which are proving that relations between these sectors are friendly or not friendly. Meanwhile, Umar in Mali is verifying, because sometimes some information could be not very very up to date, right? And it is changing, right? Now I would ask Anna, right, to give my major results, right? Preliminary results, right? Please. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you. Good day, dear colleagues. Today I would like to tell about the analysis of the interactions between the actors of the Malian crisis. So first of all,
I'm sorry, could you start slideshow, right, to make it for the full screen, right?
yes, 1 second.
Yes, thanks.
On the political map of Mali, actors and their components belonging to different levels of interactions are intersecting. And this is creating a complex and unique system of relationships. Here you can see 4 levels of interaction. First of all, it's global and regional level. The main thing here is that the boundary between the global and regional levels is quite transparent. So we can talk about the activity of actors at both levels, especially of terrorist actors and international actors like European Union, for example. So then there is national level and a local level represented by ethnic actors mostly. So speaking about state actors, we should realize that we should consider state actors as the part of a big system of relationships. So let's look at the picture. For example, Malian government now have quite mistrustful relationships with all the rebel actors, even with Platform, which is traditionally pro-governmental group. Of course, all the state actors have negative and unfriendly relationships with terrorist actors. And unfortunately, nowadays, for that moment, Mali and Algeria have quite complicated relationships with France, mutual lack of understanding. But all these actors and G5 Sahel forces. And last but not the least, is the relationships of state actors and Malian civil organizations, which are in generally representing the opinion of Malian citizens and Malian people. So we're moving forward to terrorist armed groups, also global and regional level of interactions. In relation to terrorist groups, we also identified several main features in the course of the study. First is that the militants are moving away from the struggle for power only through violence and through terror, and they are trying to create their own management system, an alternative system to the official one. So most often they have their own taxes, and in return they're guaranteeing security to the tribal communities. But what is the main thing is that they are still remaining terrorist groups, even with their own management system. The second point is that the counter-terrorism struggle in the regional context turns into a counter-insurgency struggle. So the terrorists are promising to solve problems with access to water or land, and that's why they're gaining support from the local population. So they have broad social base. The low standard of living, the inability to find a job, religious influence on the population, dissatisfaction with the authorities and official government, and the ethnic factor create a favorable environment for the spread of radical Islamism. And the third point is that terrorist actors use ethnic and tribal contradictions and conflicts to strengthen their own influence. For example, now they're using Fulani and Dogon conflict to strengthen their influence in the region. So about national and ethnic local level, I'll ask Umar, my colleague, to tell. Umar, please.
Umar, what kind of authorization you need to activate microphone? Dear colleagues, could we let Umar to speak, right? His about his local experience, right? From some of us, right? Activation of microphone, right, in conference.
Now it's fine. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you, dear Anna. Beyond the global issue and the fight against terrorism, Mali has also multiple conflicts that operate on a national level. And the one I will discuss are separatism and low intensity community conflict. So the different armed groups individually observed have relationship with each other. Some of them come from the split of others. Some were formed in opposition to others. Some were created to face an imperative of insecurity. And some even of them have also joined forces to set up a new organization. So there is a multitude of interactions between armed groups, but also between some of them and some terrorist organizations. The negotiation processes that aim at reaching the inter-Malian peace agreement led to the formation of coalition between the armed groups. Today, there are on one hand, CMI in the platform, both signatories of the Algiers agreement, and on the other hand, dissidents from these two movements who have formed the coordination of Entente movements called CME. So there are also many armed groups that were excluded from the dialogue framework stipulated by the June agreement, notably the self-defense militia. In central Mali, which has been progressively affected by the conflicts whose origin lie in the northern Mali, some self-defense groups have emerged. We can mention the Donso, mainly composed of Bambara, the Danambasago self-defense group composed of Dogon, and the Sekuboli group of Fulani. The first two groups claim to be traditional hunting societies, hence the name Donso and Dana, which mean hunters in Bambara and Dogon language. As for the group of Sekuboli, it has formed an alliance with the MSA, Movement for Salvation of Azawad, and is made up mostly of former elements of the Mujahid terrorist movement. Next slide, please. The Malian crisis gives strong ethnic signal. For instance, the armed self-defense group have one thing in common with the armed groups that signed the Algiers agreements. They have an ethnic identification that they usually claim. If we take an example about the CMA, which is composed of different armed group, we can choose the MNLA, for example, which is mostly composed of Tuareg and claim its fights for the Tuaregs. We have the MAA, which is composed of Arab, which name is also called, claiming a fight for the Arabs of the north of Mali. The self-defense militia, Ganda Izo and Ganda Koi, have emerged to face the MNLA and the MAA, which have been considered by them to be ethno-centralized group. So the Ganda Izo and the Ganda Koi organization are mostly composed of Sorai and Bela ethnic groups. We have the Dogon militia, which is Danambasago, which is composed of Dogon ethnic group, and we have the Donso, which is mostly composed of Bambara. So this is a very particular situation in the Malian crisis, which shows that mostly all the actors of the crisis, excluding the state, are having ethnic revendication. Next slide, please. In most cases, we can give a couple of conclusions out of our research. And in most cases, the main factor for the creation of this group is insecurity and the need to defend the interests of their community. The armed group have also been able to gain the trust of the population by offering a number of basic services in a context where the state is struggling to ensure the security, education, or health of the Malian population. So there is also something that we can remember as a major point of this analysis. The Malian state, because of its weak presence throughout its own territory, does not have strong legitimacy with certain communities. For example, the data collected by CIPRI from 2,000 people in the region of Ségou and Mopti show that for the population concerned, non-state actors are much more present than any other security actors, including the Malian states. That's all that I want to add to what Anna said. I want to thank you for your attention. If you have any question, we are ready to answer.
Mr. Conferenton, you are unmuted.
I don't know if you can hear me. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
I'm sorry. Yes, there was another electronic problem. So, with regard to the last group presentation, which was, I'm sure you agree, very enlightening and complex, I would like to ask if the wider issue we are dealing with is not the failure of the nation-state system in at least that part of Africa, because obviously those states were established by the colonial powers, and they have some serious issues with regard to their ethnic and linguistic and religious composition. So would you like to comment on that?
Probably we would ask Umar, right, to comment, right?
Thank you, dear professor. Yes, I think there is not, in particular the Malian case, such situation, because these communities have been living together for centuries, and there have been no such problem between ethnical groups. I think that actually what is happening is that we have some groups that are revendicating, claiming to be representative of some ethnic groups, but who don't usually, and this is some question that we have to ask ourselves, have obviously the legitimacy to represent these ethnic groups. So there is a question that we should ask ourselves when we talk, for example, about, I don't know, the MNLA, or when we talk about some of the group from the platform. We can say that 100% the community that they are claiming to fight for are in the same line with them in their fights. So actually, there is not a proper ethnical conflict between communities in Mali. We can't compare Mali, for example, in the Rwanda case, where such question have been asked and where such problems have been more relevant. In our case, there is, in fact, some groups that are claiming to be to represent some community, but they don't represent fully those communities in the way that they should be in the way that they should be compared, for example, to some other situation that we have been seeing, as in Congo and in Rwanda. You are still here.
Any other questions or comments? Dr. Kulikov, Vladimir, can you hear me? Hello? Actually, I should say that we have been focusing in this seminar on what we might call the security aspect with its social and economic and political implications, but mostly on the issue of militancy, terrorism, and Islamism, which is spreading as an alternative ideology to the Westernization, which was implanted by the colonial powers. And at the same time, we have also in our extended team, various organizations which are working on the environmental and agricultural development of Africa, in particular by using ecodynamic, biodynamic agricultural methods, particularly for fertilization of arid lands and for irrigation with, you might say, environmentally sustainable methods, and also reforestation. And therefore, in particular, there is a group called the foundation called Pro Natura, which does extensive work in reforestation and agricultural development in certain parts of Sahelian Africa. This time, we felt that perhaps a technical report on that would not be quite in tune with the overall theme of the seminar, but we certainly would like to include a paper from them, which I'm sure they will provide as part of the proceedings of the overall seminar. So this was my comment with regard to this very important aspect of the need for integral and balanced development, which was emphasized by some of the speakers, in particular by Dr. Dory and also by, of course, also Dr. Pusztai, Mr. Pusztai. So I would perhaps now ask if there are any final comments from our Russian colleagues or from any of the participants. And at this point, we could probably consider winding up the seminar, and we will proceed then to collect in due course the various reports and papers, and hopefully publish them in, as part of a white paper. So Dory, please.
Yes, a very short comment about the contribution of our Russian colleagues. I think it's very important to do what they are doing. It's to base the research on empirical data. The way you are proceeding is very complementary of the analysis of terrorism that we are making in a geographic aspect mainly. And it permits to compare the validity of information. Obviously, the problem you have and I have and a lot of us have is to have actualized data. We work with the global terrorism database, but we can go only to 2019 because the data are not released. And that's a real problem. because the situation now in Africa in the security aspect is evolving not at a year span, but at a week span. So we are in a situation where we are trying to run after the insurgent groups, but certainly we need, in the matrix you elaborate, probably I should not have elaborated like you had elaborated, but it's very suggesting and it's very thought-provoking, because it reveals a lot of things that we normally don't see, and mainly contains the geopolitical aspect, is the change of scale. Is it considered the non-state actors, to consider the ethnic actors, to consider the national actors, the global actors, and those people interfere in very surprising ways when a crisis goes out of control. So that's my own comment, but I want to congratulate you because you are doing a good job.
Any other comments from our Russian colleagues?
If I may, this issue of collecting and verifying data might bring the noble participants of this seminar to the World Statistical Congress. We've been working together with some of the participants for a long time with Professor Simchera, who was the head of the Russian Statistical Institute, and he, up until his last days, tried to assist us with the access to the very fastly changing data. And he was, as a high professional, he always claimed that garbage in, garbage out. So he was, by the way, together with Dr. Combe, we have somehow were at the beginning of this conference together with Simchera, and he went again to a couple of years before he died to Kuala Lumpur to present his ideas on how this statistical data could be, let's say, not hidden the way it is, but how it could be instrumentalized for general use. So if there is some interest in obtaining this kind of data, I mean, I'm not a businessman. There are, I mean, you might be interested into getting in touch with this World Statistical Congress, as well as with a couple of friends of ours who has been working on the issues of migration in Africa for 40 years. I think you know Professor Herve, World Values Survey, and there is also a very kind person, Patrick Taran in Switzerland, who is organizer and executive of the Global Migration Organization. He has been working there for, I think, 30 years, his personal experience and the data. So to verify the data, you should go to the Statistical Congress, if I may propose, and to, in order to work with it, there are at least several groups that has been on the field for very many years. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that perhaps we are coming close to the end of this conversation. We obviously hope that this will be the first of a series, which hopefully will eventually be physical meetings, because we all see the problems that can crop up in online conversations, especially when people are widespread, far apart. But I would say that perhaps as a sort of suggestion, or at least a sort of a comment offered to your reflection, what we are seeing in Afghanistan may have far-reaching repercussions in the part of Africa we have been considering, because Afghanistan is now about to be recognized internationally, at least by several powers, as a Taliban state. And that could be used as an example, as a model by some of the current insurgent movements in Africa and in other parts of the world. So it is certainly a very impactful evolution that is taking place, where some movements that were considered completely alienated from statecraft and from international diplomacy are perhaps about to be admitted in some way or another as members of the global concert, if we want to call it that way. So that is something that we have to consider, for better and worse, because it's not clear that certain governments will be able to hold their territories forever. And it's not clear that they will be able to rely on foreign support. So at that point, will we see a real change in the kind of regimes that are ruling these parts of the world? And will we have to deal with movements and parties and organizations that are essentially guided by completely different ideologies and goals than the ones that we have been trying to share with them? I don't know if any of you want to say anything about that. Well, I think that in this condition, perhaps we could, Mrs. Bogdasarova, would you like to make a few final comments, or how would you like to end this session?
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter, but I have to say that we have one more presentation from RUDN University, from Svetlana Bokeria and her team. And unfortunately, we have time to listen to this presentation.
Oh yes, very good. Because we didn't have that on the list that we got, so we are glad to go ahead with that.
Okay. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to be invited to this webinar and to have this opportunity to share with you some information about United Nations peacekeeping operation in Mali. It will be first part, and the second part, ECOWAS activity. And to begin with, peacekeeping operation among the most important international mechanism for contemporary conflict management, but their effectiveness often remains the subject of confusion and debate in both the policy and academic communities, and various organizations, including the United Nations, African Union, ECOWAS, European Union, have come under increasing pressure to justify the effectiveness and impact of their peacekeeping operation. As for operation in Mali, the Security Council resolution establishing MINUSMA contained two aspects that would remain key to its mandate throughout the following years. First, stabilization and supporting the restoration and extension of state authority initial in the north of the country, and since 2018 also in the central regions of the country. And the second core task was supporting and implementing a political process which later became the Algiers Agreement, and support would initially be provided for the implementation of the transnational roadmap, including assistance for the national political dialogue and electoral process. And less prominent aspects of MINUSMA's mandate at its establishment were the protection of civilian and UN personnel, promotion and protection of human rights, including deployment of human rights observers. And we conditionally divide the activity of the mission into several periods, highlighting 4 of them. And I would like briefly overview mandates for MINUSMA. The first period, security mandate, stabilization of key population centers, and support for the re-establishment of state authority and administration through the country, and political mandate, support the implementation of the transnational roadmap, including the national political dialogue and electoral process. As for the second period, no significant changes in political mandate, but a security mandate refocused towards the center, implemented with the deployment of a Senegalese quick reaction force and increasing focus on self-protection as attacks were becoming more frequent. The third year political mandate conclude a pact for peace, and security mandate support restoration of state authority in the center. And as for fourth period, this period links to the development of the second strategic priority of the mission, which is to facilitate the implementation by Malian actors of a comprehensive political-led strategy to protect civilians, reduce intercommunal violence, and re-establish state authority. 2/3 of MINUSMA's uniformed personnel were African and originated from Western and Central Africa. Top 5 troop contributors, Burkina Faso, Chad, Bangladesh, Senegal, Egypt, and top 5 police contributors, Senegal, Togo, Bangladesh, Benin, Burkina Faso. Personnel of the operation is situated in 13 locations in the country, and the interesting fact is that MINUSMA would generate European interest, and European are providing more than 1,000 troops to the UN multidimensional integrated stabilization mission in Mali. And this European interest results in a contribution unprecedented in UN peacekeeping operation in Africa since the mid-1990s, including aviation units, intelligence, and special forces. This also resulted in some pressure from European troop contributing countries to update UN peacekeeping practices, including, for instance, the use of intelligence. The first success of MINUSMA was that it contributed successfully to re-establishing the constitutional order and to the security stabilization around urban centers. And despite the continuing insurgency, 2 peaceful rounds of presidential election were organized. The mission also faced decreasing support from the local population, who felt that UN forces were not doing enough to support the Malian armed forces and to prevent armed groups from targeting civilians. And protests, several of which turned violent, were organized against MINUSMA and against Operation Seval across the country, questioning their impartiality and calling for their withdrawal. And another challenge to MINUSMA's popular support had its origin in sexual exploitation and abuse. In order to address the limited support among the local population, the Security Council strengthened MINUSMA's mandate in 2016 to conclude developing an effective communication strategy and setting up MINUSMA's Radio Mikado in the hope that this would increase awareness and understanding of its mandate and activities. And after the signing the Algiers agreement, MINUSMA assumed additional responsibilities for supporting the implementation of the peace accord on which it is based and for monitoring the ceasefire. The deployment into ongoing counterterrorism theater was extremely challenging for MINUSMA, and it made the mission the deadliest of all current UN peace operation, although 2018 witnessed a decrease in fatalities and 2019 became the worst year on record. MINUSMA's second main mandated task is protection and stabilization. And regular UN protection of civilian efforts have been complemented in MINUSMA's mandate by stabilization tasks. And initially this was formulated in MINUSMA's 2013 mandate and then was reformulated by 2018. The mission is also exceptional in that it has a designated stabilization and recovery section that manages substantial funds for quick impact projects, supporting political and security structures, as well as more long-term peace building efforts. Initially, MINUSMA appears to have had a clearly stabilizing effect on the security situation in Mali, and as shown by the trends in figure, after the deployment of the mission, violence as measured in conflict-related deaths decreased significantly throughout the country. And MINUSMA's stabilizing effect is also shown by the return of internally displaced people and refugees. However, in spite of its robust mandate, MINUSMA's presence and action have not brought sustainable peace to Mali. And the largest source of displacement is the center, with more than 60,000 IDPs in the Mopti and Segu regions. MINUSMA investigates allegations of and reports on violation of human rights and of international humanitarian law, and supports capacity building and human rights awareness among the Malian security sector and justice sector. And the changes, they have some changes in designation that has impacted on previous reported data, mainly as more matters now fall under the designation of serious misconduct, including all forms of criminal activities, and designation of a matter as serious misconduct or misconduct does not presuppose the nature of severity of the accountability measures that may be imposed. The mission has been criticized for focusing too much on the implementation of the peace agreement in the north, as well as protecting its own personnel at the cost of protection of civilians, particularly in the central regions. And MINUSMA's space for protection of civilians is shrinking due to the hostile environment it operates in, as well as ambitious position in relation to counterterrorism efforts. And until 2016, MINUSMA was a relatively successful peace operation. It managed to improve stability in northern Mali, contributed to decreasing the number of civilians killed in the conflict, and the increased stability enable large numbers of displaced persons to return home. MINUSMA also supported the organization of the 2013 elections. Many of these achievements are still standing and are particularly impressive considering the size of the country, the logistical challenges, the hostile security, and the relatively limited sources. resources. And since 2016, MINUSMA's effectiveness in terms of stabilization and protection of civilians has decreased. And also is in the north fighting between the signatories of the Algiers agreement has been absent. Violence by Islamist groups has increased, and progress in the Malian peace process is slow. Summing up, if the UN Security Council makes budget-driving choices and continue to desire more without adequate resources, the results of this mission may be disastrous. So I'd like to stop now my presentation, and the second part, activity of ECOWAS, will be presented by the governor of Nara, Colonel Doumbia. Omar Doumbia, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk about ECOWAS activities in Mali. How ECOWAS did it in Mali, its success and its limits. As a reminder, the political and security situation in Mali began in 2012. Due to the increase in terrorist activities and threats, the United Nations has intensified its cooperation with African states and a regional and sub-regional organization with a view to developing measures to prevent conflict and combat terrorism. It is with this mind that an ECOWAS operation was deployed in Mali for the stabilization of the Malian state in accordance with the spirit of the protocol relating to the mechanism for the prevention, management, and resolution of conflicts for the maintenance of peace and security adopted in Lomé, Togo on December 1999 by the heads of state and government of ECOWAS member states, expressing concern at the increase in conflicts affecting the Sahel region. Mali's political and security situation has deteriorated seriously since 2012 coup and the rise of rebel and jihadist groups. This is how the AU Peace and Security Council decided to adopt the harmonized concept of operation for the deployment of an international force under African leadership. And on December 2012, it adopted under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, a resolution 2085 authorizing the deployment of a support mission in Mali, which called MISMA. This resolution, which includes a political component and a military component, attempt to take into account all the challenges surrounding the intervention in Mali, in particular the humanitarian risk and questions relating to the respect for human rights. On political level, the resolution calls on the Malian authorities, in accordance with the framework agreement signed on April 2012 between government of Mali and rebel groups, to finalize through a broad and open political dialogue a sheet road for the transition aimed at fully restoring constitutional order with the organization of presidential and legislative election before April 2013. The resolution also calls on Malian transitional authorities to engage in credible negotiations with the groups present in the north of the country and groups that dissociate themselves from the terrorist organization. On the military level, the Council underlines that the consolidation and redeployment of the Malian defense and security forces throughout the territory of the country are of vital importance to ensure the security and stability of Mali, even if this is not the case, not effective until now. The mission will first have to rebuild the capacity of the Malian army in close coordination with the other international partners. Secondly, it will have to help the Malian authorities to regain control of the north and reduce the threat posed by the terrorist organization there. In order to better support the ECOWAS force, the Council also affirms that it is considering providing for an initial period of 1 year logistical support devices to MISMA, which will be financed by the United Nations. However, despite these promises, the lack of financial and logistical resources seriously impaired the deployment of MISMA. Only 2,000 African soldiers in total had been dispatched to Mali as of January 2013. Also on February 2013, the ECOWAS chiefs of staff were briefed on the revised joint concept of operation on MISMA, including a military component more robust, as well as substantial police and civilian components. Despite the challenges facing MISMA, it was achieved political and diplomatic success. Thanks to the mediation of ECOWAS, the preliminary agreement to the presidential election and to the peace talks in Mali was signed between the transitional government of Mali on the one hand and the separatist movement on the somewhere else. The signing of this agreement was a big step in the evolution of a negotiation process between the Malian parties in Ouagadougou on June 2013 under the aegis of the ECOWAS mediator, His Excellency Blaise Compaoré, and His Excellency Goodluck Jonathan, Associate Mediator, and with the facilitation of the AU, UN, and African Union, which led to the sign of this agreement. The preliminary agreement made it possible to obtain a ceasefire and organization of the 2013 presidential election throughout Malian territory, although hostilities resumed after the presidential elections. In addition, despite the effort made, MISMA has shown its limits, which will lead the United Nations Security Council, following the request of the interim president of Mali, Diankunda Traoré, to deploy a peace mission and peacekeeping mission in under the aegis of UN. It is in this context that on July 2013, MISMA was replaced by the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali, MINUSMA, following its resolution 2100 of April 2013. It's about a peace operation launched under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. According to this resolution, mission should support the political process, protect civilians, monitor human rights, put in place the conditions necessary for the delivery of a humanitarian aid, and facilitate the return of the displaced person and assist in the extension of the state authority and the preparation of free and peaceful elections. From the moment MINUSMA took office, it greatly supported the Malian transitional authorities in their effort to hold a free and a transparent presidential and legislative election. However, it will not succeed in stopping the violent fighting between armed groups and Malian armed forces. This has had a major negative impact on the gradual redeployment on the army and administration in the northern Mali. To conclude, it is clear that in the sub-region framework, today, even in African states are willing to take into account the management of their security through preventive measures and the fight against terrorism. They now remain dependent on the lack of financial and logistical resources. This was the case with ECOWAS, which did not succeed in Mali because it was seriously handicapped by the lack of means. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel Dumba Amara. And
yes.
I believe we have now rounded up the various speeches. I also thank Mrs. Bokeria. It was a very interesting update on the role of the UN mission and associated efforts. And perhaps now, given unless there is any other question or comment, we have reached the time to conclude. I'm sorry about the slight interruptions and delays due to occasional technical problems, but I hope that, I believe all speakers were correctly heard, and so all in all, the contents were conveyed adequately. So, if there are no further comments, I would then perhaps thank the Russian International Affairs Council, in particular Dr. Kortunov and Mrs. Bogdasarova. And I would like to thank on our collective behalf all the presenters, all the speakers, and we will be in touch with you for the follow-up in terms of the papers and the publications that will follow. And we look forward to a future occasion and wish you a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you once again.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.